Good evening. This is Peace and Justice Connections. I'm Bruce Judici, your host, and this evening we have Mike Wurtz here, who is the director of the Special Collections at UOP. And this evening we're going to talk, among other things, we're going to talk about the John Muir Collection and an event that's happening in at the UOP campus on April 13th, I believe. Celebrating John Muir, and this is sort of our opening into our Earth Day presentation. We're going to be celebrating on April 14th at Victory Park in Stockton, and that's. But we can talk about that later. Right now, welcome, Mike.
Well, thank you for having me tonight. This is very exciting and a great opportunity, and we're looking forward to our events on April 13th.
Yeah, something totally new to me. So I think a lot of people don't know that there are that the special collections actually exist at UOP, and you have your hands on all of those things, but most particularly this one here is going to be celebrating the John Muir collection. So what's going to be happening on the 13th?
The 13th. So we've been curating the John Muir papers at the University of Pacific for almost 50 years.
Okay.
In 1970, the papers came to the University of Pacific from UC Berkeley.
Okay.
And they were on a status that was, the family said, we want you to curate this material for us for all these years.
What does that mean, curate?
Just take care of it.
Okay.
In other words, collect, preserve, and make available.
Okay.
And of course, that's the most important part of what we do, is make things available. And so these collections have been with us for almost 50 years, and we've been talking with the family recently, and they finally decided that, hey, we would like to donate the collection to you,
Oh, nice.
which we still continue to curate everything.
Yeah.
And so on April 13th, we're going to be celebrating the fact that they've donated the collections to us.
Wonderful.
So that's the exciting part there.
Yeah.
So
how much material is there?
yeah, so the collection is probably, archivists have a tendency to measure things in feet, linear feet. So imagine a small banker's box, which is 1 foot, all the papers lined up like in files. If that's 1 foot of stuff, we've got about 80 feet of John Muir material.
Wow.
And it's really cool. So in addition, we've got the things that you might expect. We've got his correspondence. That's in the neighborhood of about 7,000 correspondence. These are letters to and from John Muir.
Wow.
The bulk of them, of course, are to John Muir, right? Because it's what he collected.
Right.
So that's a major part of the collection. Another major part of the collection is we've got his journals, and that's probably the richest thing that we have are his journals. There's about journals and notebooks. There's about 100 journals and notebooks, and these are the actual journals that Muir had in his pocket when he went to Alaska or he went to Shasta or wherever, and that's the actual journal.
So if I go out and buy a paperback book of John Muir's a notebook that he has, which I believe I have by my bedside. Yeah. So that would be a copy of one of these things transcribed or typed up.
Yeah, most likely you probably have a copy of Linnie Marsh Wolf's the unpublished John of the Mountains, the unpublished manuscripts of John Muir, or something like that. And she went through and found excerpts from those, and that's the bulk of it.
Wow.
So there's a lot of that. That's a very important part of the collection. We can go into that a little bit later. That's the transcription project as well.
Okay.
We've got hundreds of drawings of John Muir, and that's pretty exciting.
Of John Muir, not his.
By John Muir.
By John Muir.
Yeah, and we can go into that a little bit more later if you want to. Sure. I'm actually doing a project with that, and we can talk about that. So there's that's the correspondence, the journals and notebooks, the drawings. We have a lot of photographs that John Muir owned. There's about 3,000 photographs that he owned. Never was a photographer. We can go into that deeper too.
Sure. Now, what was his life? What years did he live?
Okay, good. Let's go all the way to the beginning. Born in 1838 in Dunbar, Scotland. When he's about 11 years old, his father says, "We're moving to America. Let's go." This is 1849, not associated with the gold rush particularly. Picks up the whole family, moves to Wisconsin in 1849, and Muir spends about the next 10 or so years of his life there. Ends up becomes this inventor,
Mm-hmm.
an amazing inventor,
Mm-hmm.
and shows off his wares at the state fair in Wisconsin,
Okay.
where he caught the eye of some of the people that work at the University of Wisconsin, and they said, hey, you should go to school.
Mm.
So off he went to school. So, I mean, and then of course the story goes on and on.
Uh-huh.
But we can,
So
we
he
can
went to
circle
school
back.
in Wisconsin.
He went to University of Wisconsin briefly, probably about 2.5 years.
So when did he come out here?
So, well, gosh, it's so easy because it's just like all these stories are cascading
Yeah,
through my head
yeah,
right now.
yeah.
Cascading would be a mirror word,
Yeah,
by the way.
no.
So he's at school, and then he decides to drop out of school, and he kind of wanders around Canada.
Mhm.
And at that time, he's becoming this professional. He's like an efficiency expert. He'd go into a business that was making brooms, for example, and he'd say, you're making 10 brooms a day. Well, if you tweak these machinery here and you put these two people together and do that one job, you might be able to do 20 brooms or 50 brooms a day.
Okay.
So he gets really good at this. This
Okay.
is really kind of the point of his life.
Uh-huh.
He's going to be an inventor.
Uh-huh.
So after a while of doing this in Canada, he decides to move back to the United States, ends up getting a job at a carriage house in Indiana.
Okay.
This is a big turning point in John Muir's life. He's working at this carriage house one evening, and he's working on some machinery, and he ends up poking a big hole in his right eye.
Oh.
Yeah, and it's really cool because in the collection that we have these letters that John Muir's written to his friends that shows a drawing of his eye
Oh.
with a little spot where he
Oh.
poked it. And of course, at this moment, he's kind of looking down, and the what is that called? What's in your eye? That vitriol
Oh, yeah.
humor.
Oh, yeah, right. Vitreous humor.
Vitreous humor.
Right.
It's dripping into his hand,
Okay.
and he's looking at it with his left eye, and he's kind of thinking, "Well, this isn't good.
This
This
is
is
not
not good." So he kind of, he gently cups his eye with his
Oh,
right
man.
hand, and he walks home. And by the time he gets home, he's basically, his left eye goes sympathetically blind, and so now he's blind in both
Oh, my
eyes.
God.
This is John Muir,
oh
you
my
know.
Gosh, yeah.
So he was actually more or less completely blind for about 3 weeks. The doctor said, "You're never going to get you're never going to get your vision back."
Oh,
and
my
Muir's
God.
like, "Yeah, this
Oh,
doesn't
my
look
God.
good."
Yeah.
So he sits and recuperates, and fortunately his eyesight comes back in his left eye and eventually comes back in his right eye.
Oh.
But it's in this darkness he starts to think about what he's doing with his life. He
Yeah.
thinks about the fact that, I'm doing this inventing thing,
Yeah.
but he also takes every moment of his life to get out and as he called
See
it,
things.
botanize.
Yeah. Okay.
Look at the plants.
Yeah.
And he finally decided, and I don't know the quote exactly, but it's something like, "I bade adieu to all things, all inventions of man, and decided to devote my life to the inventions of God."
Uh-huh.
And that's when he makes this big decision that he's not going to do this anymore. His first real idea was to go to South America. Alexander von Humboldt had been to
Okay.
South
Okay.
America, so we're kind of circling back
Sure.
there. And he goes to he sets off on his way to South America, and that's his famous 1,000-mile walk to the Gulf.
Okay.
He makes his way down. This is another theme of John Muir.
1,000-mile walk?
Yeah, he decides to walk to Florida and eventually
Okay.
take a boat down to
Okay.
South America.
Okay.
So he gets to Florida. By this point, he's had quite a few adventures. He's walking through the deep South shortly after the Civil War.
Wow.
This is
Yeah.
1867 right now, and
Okay.
he's about 30, almost 30 years old.
Wow.
And he's walking through, and he gets malaria,
Mm.
recuperates on the coast of the Gulf Coast of Florida,
Mm.
and decides, I think it's time to go to California instead.
Yes. Yeah.
Of course, right?
Yeah, because
Yeah.
of course. Well, there's
Yeah.
well, I don't know if there was malaria back then
Right.
over here because of the swamps
Right.
and there weren't levees and everything
Yeah.
like that. But
He-
yeah, I mean it's probably less dangerous than maybe Brazil or something.
Right.
Yeah.
And that it's kind of a big turning point in his life. He'd already was familiar with Yosemite. When he's recuperating from his eyesight, he writes to one of his dear friends and mentor, Jean Carr, and he writes to her and he says something along the lines of, "I've been reading about Yosemite recently and I really want to go there." He even mentions, he starts to think about the giant sequoia trees.
Mm.
Giant sequoia trees in the Sierra, a botanical wonder. And, he's a botanist, so he really wants to see these trees. So he's sick in Florida, decides that he needs to go to California, hops on a boat, goes to New York because there's no boats from Florida to California, goes to New York. Actually, before that, he goes to Cuba. But anyway, goes to the Isthmus of Panama. I mean, these stories, it's hard to kind of stay online. So if I'm getting offline, just tell me. Anyway, goes across the Isthmus of Panama, sails up the coast of California, ends up in San Francisco in the spring of 1868 on the streets of San Francisco. And he asks somebody, where can I go? And they say, where do you want to go? And he says, anywhere that is wild. And they kind of point towards Yosemite.
Go east. Yeah, there you go.
Off he goes. He heads down. He actually crosses the bay, heads down the East Bay to Pacheco Pass, goes over Pacheco Pass, crosses the Central Valley. This is, again, spring of 1868.
He's not walking, right?
He's still walking.
He's still walking.
Just 100% walking dude. And he saunters, right? You may have heard that before.
Yeah. So at this point, was Yosemite really well known? I mean, was it famous? I mean, was everybody going there? It was like a big long line, and you can't get a campground for 2 years.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and then there were cables going up to Half Dome, and he needed to get a permit before he could go. It really slowed down John Muir quite a bit. No, actually, at this time, Yosemite.
1868, huh?
Yeah, so Yosemite had been, quote, discovered. Of course, this is by, European Americans. The Native Americans had been living there for years.
Sure.
So this is about 15 years-ish after Yosemite had been, quote, discovered, unquote.
Right.
And so it was still pretty raw.
Yeah.
There were some hotels in the valley and that sort of thing. But he gets there, and last year was 150th anniversary of him being in Yosemite for the first time.
Okay.
He arrives there, and he's running out of money again, which is another story. I'm going to say that a lot tonight. That's another story. I'm trying to figure out how many stories can I tell here. But he gets there, realizes that there's not, he's running out of money. He spends about 10 days in the valley and decides that he needs to go down to the Central Valley. Swings through the Mariposa Grove, finally sees his giant sequoia trees that he wants to see so badly. And then he gets a job as kind of like a shepherd. And that's kind of the task of what became My First Summer in the Sierra, which isn't his first book, but it's a book that he ends up writing about his first summer in Yosemite, 1869 now.
Okay.
So yeah,
that's 150 years from
this
year.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So this is the 150th anniversary of My First Summer in the Sierra.
Okay.
Lots of things happen.
Very good. Well, this is Peace and Justice Connections Radio. We're talking with Mike Wurtz, who is the curator for the special collections at UOP, and we're talking about the event that's coming up, or actually the John Muir Celebration event, which is going to be April 13th.
Correct.
And that's going to be at UOP. Where?
Yeah. It's just come to campus.
Okay.
So basically, it starts at 1:00 with a movie. There's somebody's put together a film called The Unruly Mystic, John Muir. His name is Michael Conti. He's the director.
Okay.
The film's about 70 minutes long, and then it'll be followed by a director talk.
Okay.
You'll be able to talk with the director.
And this is at the
Janet Leigh Theater, right.
Okay.
Then immediately following that, from 2:30 to 3:30, we're going to have a Muir Legacy Fair.
Okay.
That's going to be about a little over a dozen tables of different organizations that are doing John Muir's legacy today.
Okay.
And that could be anything from the local Sierra Club to California Cedar Products that make the pencils will be there. And there'll be a bookstore will have a representation there. And the sustainability program at the University of Pacific will be there. And there'll be some, I'm not sure how familiar you are with Media X at the University of Pacific. It's a new program that uses a lot of different ways to get messages out. So they'll be there. So that's going to go on for about an hour. And then we're going to have our ceremony from 3:30 to 4:30. That is going to be, that will also include Congressman Jerry McNerney.
Okay.
And the president of the Sierra Club will be there, Lauren Blackford.
Okay.
She'll be speaking too. And then we'll have a real special guest in the sense that John Muir will be there.
Wow.
Yeah.
How'd you get him?
I know, it's so amazing. I mean, after all these years, he's been dead for over 100 years, and they just pulled him out of the grave, and they said, we need you to talk about this stuff.
Right.
Lee Stetson, you may be familiar with Lee Stetson.
Yeah.
He's done a lot of, he's kind of the preeminent John Muir reenactor these days. And so he's going to talk for about a half an hour. So it's a
wonderful.
It's a cozy 1 o'clock to 4:30 day with a movie, a fair, and this ceremony to recognize the Muir-Hanna family. Muir's daughter, Muir had two daughters, Wanda and Annie. And Wanda and Helen, I'm sorry. Wanda married a Hannah, and that is pretty much the family where most of the papers ended up going, and they're the ones that are responsible for bringing them to the University of Pacific. So we're going to be recognizing the descendants of Wanda Hannah for making this donation. So for us, it's significant. I mean, this is really big. I mean, we've been curating the papers for almost 50 years, but this is important because, now we can really sink our teeth into the value of the papers and why we have them here. Yeah.
So, continue on with John Muir after his first summer in Yosemite. Then what?
Yeah. What happens to John Muir next? Yeah. This is where things get a little bit sketchy for me personally. And my disclaimer for this evening is I am the head of special collections. Yeah. I am an archivist, and as an informational professional, I don't always have the answers, but I know where to find them, which is true for all librarians.
And that's why you invite people to come to the exhibit and to ask these questions.
Right.
Because, I mean, pretty much John Muir was the moving force behind Yosemite becoming a national park.
Right. So, 1869, he's wandering around the park. He begins to look at it. He starts to examine it in a new way. And as you're probably familiar, before John Muir came along, they looked at the Yosemite Valley. In fact, the state geologist, Josiah Whitney, looked at the Yosemite Valley and said, well, this is probably created by cataclysmic events, earthquakes. Sure. Created the land to just fall and create this beautiful valley. And John Muir was like, I'm not so sure about that. Muir was walking around in the high country, and he's seeing things like glacial polish. He's seeing other evidences of glaciers, and he's the one who first suggests that Yosemite was caused by glaciers. And now, of course, that's how we believe that Yosemite was created, was through glaciers. And so Muir is kind of like looking at the landscape in a whole new way. So that's the early 70s. Mid-70s, he's kind of refocusing his efforts on the giant sequoia tree. Then around 1880, he gets married, and is coincidentally about late 1870s, 1880s, he starts making his trips to Alaska, which he considers his living laboratory of glaciers. Right? Right. So he does that through the 80s, and then around 1890, or a little bit before that, he hooks up with the publisher of Century Magazine, Robert Underwood Johnson, and they meet in Yosemite, and Johnson kind of lights a fire under him and says, you need to do what you can to preserve places like Yosemite. And so, of course, it was in 1890 that Yosemite was established as a national park. But he got it. Yosemite, the history of Yosemite and the history of Muir are kind of intertwined. Yeah. I mean, obviously, in 1864, state of California becomes more or less runs the valley and the Mariposa Grove. Then the federal government comes along, and kind of all the land except for that that becomes Yosemite. That's Yosemite as we know it. And then then we got Roosevelt in there and Taft in there. So anyway, Muir is really focusing his efforts in the 1890s to preserve these spaces. This is when he starts the Sierra Club in 1892. Does a number of things. And then 1905, he works with Roosevelt. Again, we can get into this too, but he works with Roosevelt to make the entire Yosemite area, including the valley and the Mariposa Grove, part of the federal government.
And Tuolumne Meadows and the
outer
areas too.
Yeah. And then eventually, of course, the threats to Hetch Hetchy are later in his life. So
yeah.
That's in a capsule.
Yeah. so then now the letters that John Muir would have kept or is in your collection probably includes a lot of this stuff talking about the national park and about the formation of it.
Yeah.
And from the president even or
yeah. So we've got a series of letters between Roosevelt and Muir, and basically saying, Roosevelt's writing to Muir saying, I want to go to. I went through Yellowstone with John Burroughs, I believe it was, and I want to go through Yosemite with you, and I want to do this for 3 days, and I want to drop politics absolutely, which probably didn't happen.
Yeah.
And of course, I don't know if you've heard those stories, but Muir and Roosevelt going up to Glacier Point, they spend the first night in the Mariposa Grove sleeping among the giant sequoias. Second night is at Glacier Point where they get snowed on, and then the last night is at the base of Bridal Veil Fall or near there.
Wow.
And then back to civilization.
This is when he was president.
Right. Yeah. Hard to imagine.
I can't imagine Donald Trump going out and doing anything even vaguely similar to that.
Yeah, it's
and this was like I think Roosevelt was president in 1905, 1912, something like that.
Yeah. So this was actually 1903.
1903. Okay.
This was the spring of 1903 that Muir and Roosevelt. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
The president going out and camping with some guy.
I'm stymied by
that. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, and Barack Obama visited Yosemite in 2017, I think it was. Summer of 2017. Yeah.
Okay.
Right, as president.
Yeah.
He didn't meet with John Muir because he's dead by that point.
Yeah, and of course Yosemite now is vaguely similar to the way it looked back then.
Right.
Because now it is just so many people, and it's it just feels sometimes it just feels really used. I know that they do a really good job in trying to mitigate that, but my gosh, it's the way that you can I think a lot of people just go to the valley and think that's the only part of Yosemite there is.
Right.
But there's it's a huge park.
Yeah, and of course Muir certainly is a good advocate of that. I mean, he spent a lot of time in Yosemite Valley, and that's reflected in his drawings and photographs of Muir. But yeah, I think I don't know if I have a favorite spot of Muir's. I don't know if there's a spot that Muir would say that this is his favorite spot, but he talks a lot about Illilouette Falls, which is up the Mist Trail. I believe from the research that I'm doing, I'm actually working on a book right now of John Muir's drawings. I'm putting them together so you can look at his drawings and actually visit the places that he sat when he made those drawings. But one of the things that I'm finding is kind of clear is he spent a lot of time at North Dome. Are you familiar with that area? So North Dome is, of course, direct across from South Dome, which is now called Half Dome, right? And he made a few drawings from there, and really got a good way to observe the landscape from there. I don't know if that's his favorite spot, but it's this idea that it's an amazing view of Yosemite. So I think if Muir were thinking, hey, it's not just Yosemite Valley, he'd probably say go to North Dome. Go up Mount Hoffman, go up Mount Dana, go to Tuolumne Meadows, go to Cathedral Peak, all these places. So yeah.
Yeah, because it is. I mean, I don't know how many square miles it is, but when you go there, it's I think the image is that everybody has to squeeze into this valley, and stand in line, and but the thing is also sometimes, and I'm sure John Muir would agree that it's not. I mean, Yosemite is beautiful, but just all of the Sierras. I mean, you can go to places that are just as beautiful. Just go up any one of the highways up into the Sierras, and you can find some really fantastic mountain lakes or glacial remains, or just huge chunks of granite. You go up there now, and there's just so much snow.
Now's not the time of year to go up into the Sierra.
But it's remarkable. I mean, I remember 2 years ago when it was amazing winter.
Yeah.
And we went up to like Sonora Pass, on Father's Day, and there were like snow drifts that were really high.
Yeah.
It was just amazing. I mean, that was in June, and so it's probably going to be that way now. And you'll see. I mean, you see the water running off, and it's just beautiful. You know, this the Sierras in general are just beautiful.
Well, and that's the great thing about the Muir's time in the Sierra and the collection is that that there is a lot to document this. Muir crossed over Ebbets Pass in 1900 and ended up at Calaveras Big Trees. Our Calaveras Big Trees, 20, an hour and a half away.
Yeah, and those trees are just as remarkable as Yosemite's, or and I mean they're different than the ones on the coast, but still in terms of the size and the groves. I mean maybe they're fewer, but a lot of people don't know that.
Well, and what's really cool is Muir actually visited that grove 3 times in his life. He visited in 1876 and 1900, and then again that I know of, in 1899 and 1900. And what's really remarkable is that 2 of those visits, 1876 and 1900, he wrote about it. And it's amazing John Muir stuff. I mean, if you really want to kind of get into the mind of John Muir, you can read these 2 real quick articles. I do presentations about Muir and the Big Trees and the sequoia groves. In fact, I give presentations in the summer, campground presentations at Calaveras Big Trees and in Yosemite. And Muir's, when he goes in 1876, he's really focusing on the value of natural spaces, that we need to go to these places. That probably the equivalent today is to unplug. You need to go to this, get off your internet for a couple of minutes. Of course, Calaveras Big Trees now has free Wi-Fi, so.
Well, I'm sure there's spaces, the South Grove, I'm sure
That's
you
true.
You might be able to
it might be
avoid
hard, Well, maybe not. But anyway, so he writes about that in 1876, and of course, he notices that the big stump is there, and he calls it he said that they found the largest tree in the grove and then decided that they must have the biggest stump in the world and then dance on it.
Then dance on it,
So
it's just so symbolic. I mean, it's just horrible.
So that's 1876. He visits again in 1900, and again by this point he's really focusing on preservation.
Sure.
And on that trip he writes again, and this can get published 2 years later, and he's talking about how important it is to preserve these trees, and he says things like George Washington, passing through the hands of a French chef would have made good food. That these trees, after passing through a sawmill, might make nice furniture and stuff. Just like George Washington passing through the hands of a French chef might make good food. But for both of these things, a higher purpose has been found.
Right.
We need to preserve these things.
Right. And we've been really fortunate in that, especially now, I mean, it would be very difficult to find the political will to set aside huge areas that could be so profitable. And back then, I mean, a lot of stuff. There's a lot of it is second growth, third growth, whatever.
Right.
That it's not all virgin timber, but there are some virgin forests up there.
Yeah.
And the fact that John Muir was able to approach and convince people who were powerful enough to set those things aside is pretty remarkable.
Right. Muir is a lobbyist. We don't kind of consider that.
Well, no, I mean, he must have been fantastic. I mean, because look at what we have.
Yeah, he was fantastic. I guess everybody talks about his, the thing that killed him, and that's Hetch Hetchy. But as far as the Sierra Club and Yosemite and Kings Canyon, Sequoia, I mean, those are all instrumental by John Muir. He basically made those things happen.
So speaking of Hetch Hetchy then, so you said that's the thing that killed him, because was that really the thing that broke his heart, the filling of that valley? I mean, because how old was it? When was that filled? Was that mid 1910s or something? Yeah,
Muir's fighting that towards the end of his life. He dies at 76 years old in 1914. Okay. And the Raker Act is passed in 1913, and that's the act that basically says we can put a dam in Hetch Hetchy. So he never actually saw any construction on a dam. He never actually saw a reservoir of any sort in the Hetch Hetchy Valley, but the idea of it killed him. What did he say? Something about dam Hetch Hetchy, you might as well dam the great cathedrals of Europe, or something like that. I don't have the exact quote, but you know, a lot of people attribute that's really pretty much the thing that, you know, basically broke his heart and killed him.
Yeah. I mean, there are folks who, I mean, again, the political will is, you know, there's no reason that water has to be, you know, that San Francisco has to tap into water that is that pristine. I mean, the thing is that I would bet that 90% of San Franciscans don't drink their tap water anyway. I mean, they probably all have bottled water, and you know, so they could just as easily drink it downstream out of the delta, like just about everybody else, right? You know, and let it flow through the river like it naturally should.
I you know, it's interesting because what was it? Just a couple 3 years ago that there was actually a measure on the ballot in San Francisco to drain Hetch Hetchy, and the people voted overwhelmingly against it. So it's interesting, you know, here you have San Francisco, that
the most liberal city in the country,
and they're like, well, wait a minute, that's our water. You know, and I get that. I grew up on the peninsula. It's like that was my water too. Why?
Because the thing is that really, you know, it's for your garden and for flushing. You know, it's just, you know, or taking a shower. I just don't. You know, I don't know. I mean, I always am struck by, and especially getting into Earth Day, you know, talking about single-use bottled water or whatever, you know, single-use plastics. And so, you know, and yet, you know, a lot of the folks who would say, oh, you know, I have to drink bottled water because it's so much better than the tap water. And yet, you know, when it comes time to say, well, you know, let's see if we can preserve one of the most beautiful valleys on Earth. They say, well, you know, I think I'd rather flush it.
That's my exception there. And you know, there's a lot of activity to try to restore Hetch Hetchy, and I mean, it's heartbreaking to me to think. I mean, yes, I'm sure that if you're an engineer and you look at Hetch Hetchy Valley back in 1900, it's like, wow, this is a perfect place to put in a reservoir.
Sure, I mean, really high. But so is Yosemite Valley, for that matter. You know, because you have really steep cliffs.
Absolutely,
and you wouldn't take very much for you to dam it up.
So you know,
like Powell or, you know, like Meade or, you know, any of those.
I get what they're doing, but I don't necessarily disagree with it. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with it. Interestingly enough, one of the projects that we're working on at UOP right now, especially in the library, we've really kind of taken on a lot of digital initiatives. And one of the things that we're doing, one of our staff, Josh Salyers, is putting together a Hetch Hetchy before the dam, and he's actually created a virtual environment, and this is going to be at the fair as well. You put on the headset, and you know, you're in this virtual environment, and you actually walk around Hetch Hetchy without water in it. And you go to places, and it's really cool because not only is it this opportunity to look at Hetch Hetchy without water in it. Muir obviously visited Hetch Hetchy a number of times, and we've connected certain points in the valley to where John Muir stood and made sketches, and where John Muir stood and actually wrote in his journal, because he writes about being in the valley. You know, and what it was like. One of the main ones that we work with is a trip from 1895, and the other one's 1873. So again, we're using the archives to create these digital environments.
Well, that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's a very exciting project.
Well, we're talking with Mike Wurtz, who is the curator of the special collections at UOP, and we're talking particularly about the John Muir collection because we're celebrating on April 13th at UOP from 1:30 to 4:30, I think.
1 to 4:30.
1 to 4:30. The collection and where UOP is receiving, I guess, custody of these papers.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, just another little note on the film. Just want to warn everybody, limited seating. Another thing that I want to...
That's 1 o'clock at Janet Leigh Theater.
Yeah, 1 o'clock at Janet Leigh Theater. And I really want to give props to the local Sierra Club, the Delta Sierra chapter of the Sierra Club. They are helping to finance that, to fund bringing this film to University of Pacific on this 13th.
Margaret Prowse, she was the one who suggested that I get a hold of you.
Yeah, so they're doing wonderful work, and you know that, and she's going to have a table there too, the local Sierra Club, because again, this is, you know, the fair is about Muir's legacy. You know, what is going on today that we can say that we can draw a line and say, you know, these are Muir's ideals coming today. And I think that's a real important message with Muir. I mean, we have his collection that tells us about who he was in 1869 and et cetera, but it's important that we be like Muir.
Right.
You know, that we go out into the mountains and that we observe like Muir did, and we think about the value of this. One of the favorite things I like to talk about, one of my favorite, you know, everybody's heard the quote, "The mountains are calling and I must go," right?
Yeah, right.
And what does that mean to you?
Yeah.
I'm asking you. I'll ask you. What does that mean to you? Mountains are calling and I must go. I'm not setting you up here, I promise.
I don't know. It just means that we have to get out and appreciate nature.
Yeah. And that's great. Alex Honnold, the guy who recently free soloed El Cap, he wrote a book called, I can't remember the name of it right now, but anyway, he uses that, "The mountains are calling and I must go," as a call. Obviously the mountains are calling, but it is a call to get out into the wilderness. So a few years ago, we licensed some of the things that come out of the Muir papers, and somebody said, "Hey, I want to put that onto a piece of wood."
Sure.
And I said, "Hey, that's great. You know, here's a licensing for it, et cetera, et cetera." And you know, I got to thinking about that quote, and I'm like, what did Muir say? So I went back and found it, and in 1873, he'd written a letter to his sister Sarah. He's writing it from Yosemite Valley on September something, 1873. And he's writing this letter about all the work that he's doing. And he kind of concludes the letter with, "The mountains are calling and I must go, and I will work on while I can, studying incessantly." And that, to me, that is completely different than "The mountains are calling and I must go." The mountains are calling, I must go. It's like, hey, I'm going to go skiing. I'm going to go rock climbing.
I got to get back to work.
He's like, you know, I'm going to work on while I can, studying incessantly. I need to understand what I'm doing. And that's a real critical part. And that's kind of comes back to this idea of the Muir Legacy Fair. It's like, this is our responsibility, to work on while we can and study incessantly, to understand the Sierra, to observe it, to write about it and inspire other people to come to it. Obviously not too many people, but enough that we want to preserve this, because this is not a temporary thing. It's kind of like what we do in the archives. I mean, we're preserving these archival documents. People might think, oh, well, you know, you only have to do that for a while. It's like, no, I have to take care of this forever. I mean, I'm going to be dead, but I need everybody after me. These papers have to exist forever.
Well, it's
just like the Sierra.
Yeah, that's right. I was going to say, it's just like the Earth. It's just like what we try to instill on Earth Day, which is going to be happening on April 14th.
Yeah, I know you got quite an event.
And so the thing is that we try to instill on people that, you know, that we're passing on a legacy of an environment that we want everybody to enjoy and to have at least the same diversity that we were given when we were kids. And you know, it starts when people are young. They are impressionable. They learn that by interacting, by getting out. If people you can go all the way to Yosemite, but you could also just go to your local park. You can also just go out to the Delta. You can go to the Cosumnes River. You can go to you can go a lot of places that just get out, and so that you can learn and appreciate. Because the thing is, I think a lot of times people say, oh, well, you know, Delta smelt, you know, it's a small fish. I mean, if it gets, who cares? It's extinct. But really, if people really appreciated the complexity of just our entire biological world. I mean, it would be like you said, like drowning the Sistine Chapel. I mean, every animal that goes extinct is the result of millions of years of selection, of adaptation. And to just toss that away is like something that is just so priceless. Yeah,
you know, and Muir, you know, he spent a lot of time preserving these natural spaces like Yosemite and Kings Canyon and places like that. But I think he also saw it in a micro sense too. It's like there are other spaces too. You know, gosh, I'm trying to remember where this goes right now. But it's this idea that, you know, just find that space that is nature for you. I mean, we're really lucky. University of Pacific campus is this beautiful campus. And if you want to, I mean, every morning I walk along the levee and I see beaver,
Yeah.
I see hawks,
Is that
I
right?
see cormorants, I
Yeah.
see plants.
Uh-huh.
In fact, I'm
Okay.
working with Jim Lynch. No,
Okay.
I can't remember his name right now. I feel so bad. I should know it. Anyway, he's been doing a lot of research on the Calaveras River,
Okay.
and I've been taking pictures of the river every single day for him. But the point is that you're right. You don't have to go to Yosemite.
No.
You don't have to go to
Yeah.
Tahoe. You can actually find these natural spaces
Yeah.
right here in
Yeah,
Stockton.
and it's and for the Sierra, it's Yosemite is beautiful,
Yeah.
and it's a it's one of the most remarkable places on earth. People come here,
Yeah.
come to Yosemite from
Yeah.
all over the world, and they
Mhm.
are just inspired. I mean, especially this year, if you can get up there. Right now,
Oh
it's
my gosh.
I mean, the water
The
is
water
just
is
going to be
probably-
amazing.
It's going to be amazing.
And my daughter and wife went up there actually today.
Oh,
And
nice.
yeah, so they were able to see some waterfalls.
You've got to show
and
me
stuff.
some pictures.
Yeah,
Where are the pictures? Where are the selfies?
I
Stay away from the cliffs.
I didn't go. but yeah, and they had some really remarkable pictures of
Yeah.
Bridal Veil and Vernal
Yeah.
and the upper and lower, and so and the waterfalls, but really when people say, well, you have to go to Yosemite. Well, you can just go to any
Yeah.
one of the wilderness areas up and down. You can
Yep.
McCully River,
Yeah.
McCulmy,
Stanislaus.
yes, the Emigrant Wilderness,
Yep.
all these wilderness areas.
Yeah.
You can just and you can avoid the crowds. I mean, if you hike in like 2 or 3 miles, you avoid like 90% of the crowd.
Yeah.
You don't
Yep.
see a whole lot of, but you still see the fantastic views, what is great about the Sierra, and that's it. That's the wonderful thing about California is
Right.
that that's the Sierra, and then
Mhm.
I'm sure when John Muir was walking around, he was walking around down here in Stockton, and probably was kind of marshy and stuff. It wasn't really it wasn't the levees and stuff. But there are wetlands down here
Yeah.
that people can really appreciate, like say beaver and cormorants and
Mhm.
egrets and
Yeah.
herons and things,
Yeah.
and sandhill cranes in the
Mhm.
season, and it's just remarkable that people just have to get up out of their seats and just walk around,
Yeah.
and it's probably one of the least expensive ways that you can enjoy yourself. You
Yeah.
just have to have an appreciation,
Right.
and if you take advantage of some of Muir's writings, you can
Yep.
sort of understand maybe more of the biology that's happening.
Well, that's a really cool thing. I mean, I think one of the things that people might think when they think about the John Muir papers that it's just about John Muir, and it isn't. It's about the environment. It's a lot of different things. So if you're interested in Stockton, you could actually research Stockton in the John Muir papers and see what he thought of it and what he said about it. And in fact, in 1884,
Mosquito-infested swamp.
exactly,
Was that
kind
what it
of.
was?
That's kind of what he said. He actually passed through Stockton quite a bit. In fact, he made real good friends with a local educator, and there's a series of correspondence with this guy. But in 1884, he'd been married for 4 years, and I think by that point he had a 2 or 3 year old daughter. And he decided he was going to take his wife to Yosemite.
Hmm.
They'd planned to go for 3 weeks, and they actually passed through Stockton.
Uh-huh.
And he says, we got on the train, and we stopped in Stockton for the night, and the mosquitoes were so bad that Mama couldn't sleep. And so
Yeah.
off they go. So, he talks about Stockton in that context.
Yeah.
Of course, there's more stories from when he takes his wife to Yosemite. But
Sure.
another thing that I point to a lot concerning Muir and the Central Valley is I think it's the very first paragraph of, I believe it's My First Summer in the Sierra, where John Muir, he's talking about the Central Valley of California on his way to Yosemite. And he says, there are only 2 seasons here in the Central Valley. What do you want to guess the 2 seasons are?
Winter and summer.
Yeah, he says there's
Hot and cold.
it's actually spring and summer.
Spring and summer.
And spring starts.
Mm-hmm.
When do you think spring starts?
Well, probably May.
No, it actually spring starts on in the end of November when the rains come, right?
Okay.
So the rains come
Okay.
from November through about April.
Okay.
So that's springtime.
Uh-huh.
the rains stop,
Yeah.
and that becomes summer.
Yeah,
Everything
because
dries up.
Yeah, because it's not really a cold winter. It's
No.
not like, I mean, if you're
No.
coming from Wisconsin.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Right.
You
Mir's
know,
coming from Wisconsin, so he sees two seasons, and it's spring and summer, and that's
Yeah.
true. I mean, even the
Yeah.
worst of winter is not that bad. It's
No. Yeah.
it's always verdant this time of year.
Yeah.
In fact, this year is especially verdant.
It's beautiful. Yeah, people should be getting out. I mean,
Right.
and I know it's going to be rain the next couple days, but
Yeah.
it's not going to rain on either of our events, which is
Right.
going to be great. And but
Of course
really,
not.
no, of course not. Yeah, it's spring after
Yeah.
all. But really, it's a great time to get out.
Yeah.
It's sometimes when you live in a city, there's no way that you can entertain yourself without spending money.
Right.
But when you live in the country, and
Yeah.
Stockton is sort of the country because it
Yeah.
doesn't take long to get out.
I'll take that.
Yeah, it doesn't take long to get out into the levees or even up into Calaveras if you wanted to get into the mountains. But especially this year, the season is going to be so it's going to be so wet. I mean, when you
Yeah,
go
the
up in the
waterfalls.
mountains, when you go up to the mountain, I mean, if you go backpacking, you're not going to find dry lakes in
Mhm.
September or October. I mean, it's going to be wet, and the wildflowers are going to be fantastic.
Yeah.
So people should really. So when John Muir drew, was it just landscapes? But did he also draw flowers, birds, animals?
Yeah, this is a really remarkable thing about John Muir's drawings, and of course you can look at all these online
Okay.
through our website.
Okay. What's your website?
Probably the easiest way to get there is go.pacific.edu/archives.
Archives.
But there's a number of different websites. I mean, you can just search for John Muir papers or
Okay,
something
sure,
like that.
sure, okay, yeah.
But yeah, his drawings are just remarkable. And I think the thing that really jumps out is I'm putting together this book that you can pretty much go to the places that John Muir sat when he made these drawings.
Uh-huh.
But what makes them really remarkable is the plants are, I have not actually tested this, but I think botanists can look at the plants and say, I know what that plant
Uh-huh.
is. And then he'll draw this like beautiful picture of Half Dome or whatever.
Mm.
But in the foreground, those plants are so well detailed. He also draws people every once in a while.
Uh-huh.
They're not very good.
Yeah. What about animals?
He actually, we have a couple of animal ones.
Birds?
Yeah, not
Not
too
really,
much,
not
but
too much.
the plants are just perfect.
Mhm.
So, yeah, he's definitely a plant person
Uh-huh,
in that
uh-huh,
sense. But
uh-huh.
yeah, and we're also geolocating all those drawings, so you can go to our website, and if you click on a drawing, there'll be a little map in the corner. You click on that, and you can actually go to that exact location where that drawing
So
was
if
made.
people came to the collection,
Right.
How would they do that? Is it the library or
Yeah, basically.
or do they do that, or is
Yeah.
it all on the web and you can take a look at it, or
Yeah.
can you actually see a piece of paper that he wrote on?
Good. That's a really, yeah. So there's a bunch of different things going on here. So
Sure.
basically, the best experience for getting John Muir right now would be to go online. Okay.
Sure.
Because that's where all the stuff is. You can
Sure.
actually zoom in and
Yeah.
really get a good look.
Yeah.
Now, if you want that
Yeah.
feeling
Uh-huh.
of John Muir, then
Uh-huh.
you have to come down and look at the papers.
Yeah.
Now, we're preserving them. That's part of our mission.
Yeah,
I mean, we want to
right.
make them available,
Sure.
but we also want to preserve them. So
Yeah.
we're not going to just say, hey,
Yeah.
what do you want to look at?
Yeah,
and we
just leaf
start
through
pull-
it. Yeah. let's
Yeah.
go through it. Yeah.
It's not going to happen that
Yeah,
way, but
yeah.
give me a call
Yeah.
and I may be able to give you a tour. I'm
Yeah.
actually giving a couple of presentation this week.
It sounds
in
like
the archives.
you're really working on that. I mean, you're working on different ways for people to access it. Sometimes, I like to go to a ball game, but
Right.
sometimes I don't want to drive all the way
Yeah.
to San Francisco and pay
Right.
$35 for
Yeah.
parking and then
Yeah.
$10 for a hot dog.
Yeah.
I can watch it on TV, and
Yep.
actually sometimes you can see things that you don't see at
Exactly.
the park.
Yeah, you get the
So,
instant replay.
Yeah, right. But still, sometimes it is nice just to go
Yeah.
place and to actually see. Okay, there are the papers.
Yeah.
But it sounds like you guys are doing a lot of stuff with them. And
Right.
so you're saying, how many boxes were there? Or
Just
how
a
many-
lot of
how many
boxes.
feet?
There's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
It's like we got the 7,000 letters, the 100
7,000
journals, the thousands of photographs. We have all of his manuscripts.
So how
Drafts.
have they all been typed up, or they've been so
They've been
or
scanned,
they've
and
been
put
scanned,
online.
all
yeah.
of them. So,
No, not everything. So there
Okay.
are things that you still need to come to us for.
Okay.
But I think the really exciting thing that we're working towards right now is actually creating, we're calling it the Muir Experience, and it's
Mhm.
actually going to be a space that's going to give you that idea of a museum.
Okay.
So when you think about John Muir geographically and what his legacy is geographically. You think of Muir Woods, you think of his
Muir
house
Woods,
in
yeah.
Martinez, and you think of Yosemite, right?
Okay.
Stockton is in the middle of that archipelago of Muir Woods,
Yeah.
Martinez, Stockton,
right.
and Yosemite.
Right.
What we're going to do, in addition to actually having his papers there, is we're going to have a museum. So people are going to be able to come and get that Muir experience at the University of Pacific in the library. There'll be a space. So we have his books. We have his library that he had the books that he collected.
Oh, wow.
And of course, there's marginalia. He writes marginalia. So those will be there. We've got one of his writing desks. We've got paintings of his friend William Keith. So it's going to be an actual museum experience, and included in that, it'll be a digital experience too, where you can go to Hetch Hetchy and see it with terrain. That's going to be right there in the library.
Well, cool.
So of course we're still raising money for that, so
Yeah.
we're looking for support there. But
Sure.
we're going to cement ourselves into this.
Well, now that you have,
you know.
you have custody of the papers.
Right.
I mean, that's great. That's the first
Yeah.
step.
So it's
Yeah.
it's very exciting. I mean, we've got that going on. We're making this stuff available, and the key is sharing Muir's message, right?
Right.
That's
Right.
the most important.
Yeah.
Granted, you do want to sometimes hold that journal in your hand.
Right.
But what's as important is being able to go online and say, hey, I'm going to go to Mona Lake today.
Right.
And I'm going to go check it out, and I want to see what Muir thought of it. Sure enough, you can go into our website, type in Mono,
Yeah.
and sure enough, it'll show you drawings that John
Yeah.
Muir made of Mona Lake.
Yeah.
It'll show you accounts that he saw of the people there.
Wow.
It'll show accounts of what he thought of the lake. There's even a description of the time that he almost died in Mona Lake, which
man.
I barely touched on.
Wow.
He almost dies a lot of times throughout his life. But
Yeah, I bet. I mean, yeah.
calculated risks.
That's right. Well, yeah. I mean, the places where he's going is pretty wild. And I mean, if you get injured, there's nothing really close for you to be able to.
Yeah.
No hospital nearby.
Well, and this is what hooked me on Muir long before I came to Pacific. When I was in my teens, I was living up in the Sierra in Dorrington, and somebody had a copy of The Wilderness World of John Muir, and right near the beginning of one of the chapters, there's this story where John Muir was getting ready to go on another one of his trips out into the Sierra, and his wife Louie was saying, what if you end up getting pneumonia and dying out there all by yourself? And John Muir looked to her and he said, where could one find a more glorious place to die?
There you go.
And it's like, you
Yeah.
kind of think about it. It's
Yeah.
like, would you rather die crossing Pacific Avenue to grab
Yeah.
a beer over at Taps,
Yeah.
or do you want to die
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
the mountains?
Depends on the type of beer, really. But yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Good
Yeah,
point.
yeah,
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 if it's
yeah.
not a very good beer, yeah.
Coors Light,
But yeah,
I don't
the
think so.
point is that you can, I'm certainly not
Yeah.
encouraging anybody to die in the
No,
Sierra, but
No.
I get that. I get
Yeah.
that. It's like, this is where I want to be.
Yeah, and it's just, I think all of it has to inspire people to
Right.
take it to understand what we have, and
Right.
what we have here in California is remarkable. I mean, we have almost 40 million people now, which is just way too many.
Right.
But you can still get away to places where you're not going to see somebody.
Right.
And so it's really it's important for people to take advantage of the opportunities we have,
Right.
and to check out the John Muir collection.
Yeah.
And I see that we're almost.
I got a quote for you,
finishing
though.
up.
That'll
Oh, do you have a
blend
quote
well.
that you finish up-
This is a
finish us
Muir
off?
quote that'll blend
Yes.
in well with what you're saying.
Okay.
He says, John Muir writes, I can't remember which book, accidents in the mountains are less common than in the lowlands, and these mountain mansions are decent, delightful, even divine places to die in, compared to the doleful chambers of civilization. Few places in the world are more dangerous than home. Fear not, therefore, to try the mountain passes. They will kill care, save you from deadly apathy, set you free, and call forth every faculty into vigorous, enthusiastic action.
Here.
So it's like,
There you are.
get out there.
Get out there. The
Get
mountains
out there.
are calling.
Yeah,
Excellent.
the mountains are calling, and I
Yeah.
must go, and I'll work on while I can, studying incessantly.
Okay, so we're talking about April 13th.
Yep.
April 13th.
April
1
13th
o'clock,
at the
UOP
University of
campus.
Pacific. Yeah.
Please. Okay, come on out and enjoy the day, and then get out and enjoy the wilderness.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Michael Wurtz.
Thank you, Bruce.
Okay.